I'm so frustrated. So I'm just going to share a little research thing, kind of window into my life. So what I've got here is a sword, ooh, careful because it's a bit sharp, an antique sword that is from the 1850s. Well, it must be from between 1845 and 1854, okay? I'll explain why in a second. And importantly, it's marked on the blade, Bengal Engineers, okay? Now, Bengal Engineers swords are not common because there weren't that many Bengal Engineers officers at any given time, okay? So these are like Royal Engineers officers would be in the Queen's Army, in the British Army, but these are working for John Company, that is the Honourable East India Company. And so this was the Honourable East India Company was dissolved at the end of or during the Indian Mutiny because it was seen that it was partly their fault that the mutiny had happened, and the mutiny was the whatever you want to call it, the revolution in India was essentially put down mostly by Queen's forces and Sikh forces and Gurkhas as well as some other soldiers from other presidencies of India as well, such as Madras and Bombay. But therefore, there aren't an awful lot of these Bengal Engineers swords because the Royal Engineers was very big, but the Bengal Engineers was just one part of the East India Company's forces in Bengal, the Bengal Army, and there weren't that many officers of engineers in Bengal. So this is a fairly rare thing by itself. As it happens, I do have one other Bengal Engineer sword as well I'm lucky enough to have. But this is a Wilkinson. Now, many of you will know that Wilkinson swords are after 1854, they're numbered, and you can look into the records, and if you're lucky enough, it will say the name of the person who purchased the sword or who the sword was purchased for, or this kind of stuff. But this isn't a numbered one. In other words, it's a pre-numbered Wilkinson. You'll also notice it doesn't have a Royal Engineers style hilt on it, which I don't have one of in here at the moment to show you. It's actually an infantry officer's style of hilt. That's because the Royal Engineers style of hilt didn't come until 1857. So we already know this is pre-1854, and the engineers, Royal Engineers or East India Company engineers, used infantry style hilts. But you'll also notice it's not an infantry officer's style hilt exactly, because it's dark coloured and it's not goldy coloured. Infantry officers usually had brass hilts, as many of you will know. This is in the style of the brass hilt, but it was made in steel and then gilded. So I often talk about people, officers getting non-regulation or special order swords. This is one of those, because the officer thought, well, I don't want to go to India with a brass hilt and have people swinging tulwars at my hand, protected only by a piece of brass. I want a steel hilt. So they ordered a steel hilt and then had it gilded so it looked like regulation, because it was goldy coloured, but it's the strength of steel. So it's a Wilkinson, it's pre-numbered. This style of blade came in 1845, ergo it's a Wilkinson Bengal Engineers officer's sword with a special order steel hilt instead of a brass hilt, and it dates to between 1845 and 1854. It has also been extremely, what should we say, enthusiastically service sharpened from there upwards, okay, so from quite near the base of the blade. However, they haven't damaged that much of the etching, but it's up here, it's still quite sharp, and it's lost a little bit of the tip and been reshaped, but it's very sharp and pointy. Not in the best condition, as you can see. The worst aspect of its condition is that it has lost the shagreen or shark skin from the grip, and you can see although the grip wire is still in place, it's all quite loose and dangly, because there's no grip covering around the wood, which would normally fill that gap. So it should have had shark skin, possibly leather. Sometimes they use leather instead, but again by special order, but probably shagreen, shark skin or ray skin underneath the grip wire around the wood, and that has gone, unfortunately. But it is all solid and sound, still rings like a bell. There we go. So it's all solid and sound, sharp, nice sword. But what's driving me crazy is it shouldn't be difficult to work out which officer in the Bengal Engineers this belonged to, because we've got a date period, we've got 1845 to 1854, that they must have ordered this sword. because that's what this sword dates to. So we've only got a window of, what is that, 10 years, isn't it? No, 45, sorry, 9 years. Okay, so we've got a window of 9 years. We've got Bengal Engineers officers, which we have lists of. We know who they were during that period. So it should be relatively easy when I've got this identifying mark here to clinch it. There we go. Let's get the camera to zoom on the sword rather than my face. There we go. Let's see how close it will. So you can see there is a crest of it looks like well, it is a crown, it's coronet, with something above it like feathers. And then it's got a shield with, you will see, 3 what look like bezants, as they're known, or discs. But it gets more complicated than that. The coronet is not particularly common crest, and the coronet has something above it which is partially obscured and rubbed out on the etching. They look almost like flowers or feathers or something above the coronet, and then the shield, which has horizontal lines which can represent azure or blue. The shield has these 3 discs on it, but if you look at the discs really closely, and you won't be able to see it unfortunately from there, and even if I hold it close to the camera, if you look at the discs closely, they have some detailing within the discs. I can't tell whether it's flowers or whether they're wheels or faces or whatever. Unfortunately, it's just too faint. So you would think that given all of that information, given that I've got a coat of arms, which is a relatively simple coat of arms, and usually if a coat of arms is quite simple, it relates to an old family. It's not always true, sometimes it can just be made up in Victorian times, but very often a simpler coat of arms relates to an older, established, famous, well-known high nobility family. And then that crest is quite distinctive as well. Now, I've been through using all of the names of the Bengal Engineers officers for this period, 1845 to 1854. I have been through all of the sort of things like Burke's General Armoury, which is a book talking about coats of arms, and Fairbairn's Book of Crests, and all of these, and I've looked through my various other resources. And I just can't find anyone to match. There are a few that sort of get a bit close to it. The name Smith or Smythe comes up a few times, but there are none that really hit the nail on the head. And I have had this sword for quite a few years now, and I think I've had about 4 or 5 periods where I've gone really intensive trying to work out, right, this time I'm going to crack it, this time I'm going to work out who that person was. And I've failed every time. So there we go. If there are any heraldry experts out there, or Bengal Engineers experts, or antique sword experts who are really good at researching these things, who want to give me a hand with this, I really want to get to the bottom. The fact that it's service sharpened, this person, you know, I've thought, well, maybe it was just someone who was only in for a few months and then died of illness, or, you know, or just kind of left the service, resigned, whatever. But the fact that the sword is so well used and service sharpened and everything else, that's got to be someone who was in the Bengal Engineers for some amount of time. I know there's other possible explanations, like maybe it was someone who was in briefly and then they sold their sword to someone. But let's put that aside, because we'll never find an answer if that was the case. But I've got to try and crack that crest and that shield. Which officer of Bengal Engineers in 1845 to 1854 does this sword relate to? I really want to know. And there's a very good chance they were involved with some interesting campaigns around that time. Anyway, there we go. One of the things that I spend my time doing, partly as for my business, the Eastern Antique Arms, I'm often researching swords that I put up for sale on my website, which obviously there's a link below to. But also this sword's in my collection, and I have several swords. I probably have about 10 swords in my collection that are nice swords that I've never been able to finally crack who they belong to. But that carrot is always on a stick. I always find a little extra piece of evidence each time that gives me an idea of maybe who it could have been, but I never quite crack those ones, and this is one of those. Anyway, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't done already. Give me a like, and I'll see you again soon for another video. Cheers, folks! Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.